This is the story of how one country transformed senior health and independence by quietly redesigning everyday life. So that aging doesn't mean losing your ability to live safely at home. And now the rest of the world is scrambling to copy what Japan figured out first. Nearly 30% of Japan's population is over 65, which comes out to over 36 million people, and no other nation on the planet carries that kind of age ratio. Instead of treating this as a crisis to manage, Japan decided to treat it as a design problem to solve, and the solution has a name. It's called universal design. This approach emerged from the work of an American architect named Ron Mace, who understood that falls alone cost Americans over $80 billion annually, making accessible design one of the most critical public health interventions we have. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through what universal design actually is, where it came from, how Japan turned it into a national priority, and why countries from Singapore to Norway to the United States are now following Japan's lead. If you're over 60, this directly affects your future because the way your home, your neighborhood, and your city are built will decide whether you can live independently for years to come. Section 1. The man who started it all. Ron Mace coined the term universal design in 1985, but the idea started taking shape decades earlier in his own life. Ron Mace contracted polio at age 9 in 1951, and doctors told his parents to institutionalize him. They refused, and after a full year in the hospital, he spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. When Mace enrolled at North Carolina State University to study architecture, other students had to carry him up and down stairs because his wheelchair couldn't fit through the bathroom door. That experience shaped everything he did after graduating in 1966. On March 13, 1973, North Carolina adopted the first accessibility-focused building code in the United States, and Mace played a central role in making that happen. A year later, he founded a consulting firm called Barrier-Free Environments, taking on clients like the Kennedy Center and the Smithsonian. And by 1989, he'd established the Center for Accessible Housing at NC State, which later became the Center for Universal Design. But here's what separated Mace's thinking from everything that came before. He didn't just want buildings that accommodated people with disabilities. He wanted buildings, products, and entire cities that worked for everyone from day one, with no special entrances, no separate accommodations, and no stigma attached to using them. He put it this way: the whole concept of universal design is not to single out anyone because of a disability. Barrier-free has the intent of designing it differently for people with disabilities. But universal design is put into place so the widest range of people can use the same entrance to get into a building. 1997 brought the formal framework when Mace led a working group of architects, engineers, and researchers who published the 7 principles of universal design. Those principles are equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for approach and use. Consider what that looks like in your own home. A door handle shaped as a lever instead of a round knob works for someone with arthritis, for someone carrying groceries in both hands, for someone with a temporary wrist injury, and for a 5-year-old. One design, one entrance, one solution for everybody. Mace died on June 29, 1998, at 58 years old. Weeks before his death, he delivered his last public speech at Hofstra University, and the words still land hard today. He told the audience, "We all become disabled as we age and lose ability, whether we want to admit it or not. It is negative in our society to say, 'I am disabled' or 'I am old.' We tend to discount people who are less than what we popularly consider to be normal. To be normal is to be perfect, capable, competent, and independent." 28 years have passed since that speech, and those words carry more weight now than ever. Section 2. How Japan made universal design a national mission. Universal design started as an American idea, but Japan turned it into a way of life. No country in recorded history has aged as fast as Japan. 7% of its population crossed the 65 threshold in 1970, which demographers label an aging society. By 1994, that figure doubled to 14%, earning the label Aged Society. And by 2007, it hit 21%, which the World Health Organization classifies as a super-aged society. 24 years is all it took Japan to go from 7% to 14%. France needed 115 years for the same transition. Today, in 2025, Japan's fertility rate sits at 1.15, a record low. Annual births fell to around 686,000 in 2024, another record low. Population projections show the country shrinking from 123 million today to roughly 87 million by 2070. What pushed Japan to act wasn't a domestic event, it was an American one. The passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990 sent a signal across the Pacific, and it pushed the Japanese government to move in a similar direction. Disability activists from the Japan Council on Independent Living Centers traveled to the United States to study accessible design and brought the concepts home. And that's when Japan adapted the idea with a different angle. Where the United States framed universal design through a disability rights lens, Japan reframed it around its aging population and healthy aging initiatives, which gave the concept much wider public acceptance. The policy timeline shows how seriously Japan took this. 1994 brought the Heart-Building Law, the country's first national accessibility law, but compliance remained voluntary and progress stalled. The year 2000 brought the Transportation Barrier-Free Law, which made accessibility mandatory for public transit, while the government subsidized 75% of costs. This same year, Japan launched its landmark long-term care insurance system, providing comprehensive coverage for activities of daily living support and home modifications. July of 2005 saw the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport publish its Universal Design Policy Outline, which called out the weaknesses of the barrier-free approach. Too focused on physical disabilities, not enough continuity between facilities, too much emphasis on hardware over the human experience. Then came the Barrier-Free Law in 2006, a unified framework that merged the two earlier laws and covered transportation, buildings, roads, parks, and outdoor parking. Non-compliance now triggered fines of up to 3 million yen. January 2016 brought another leap when the Japanese cabinet adopted Society 5.0, a vision for a super smart society, using artificial intelligence, robotics, and the Internet of Things to tackle societal challenges, with aging as a primary focus. February 2017 followed with the Universal Design 2020 Action Plan, created ahead of the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics, aimed at building, in the government's own words, an inclusive society that is comfortable and accessible to everyone regardless of age, nationality, and ability. None of this was symbolic. This was infrastructure policy backed by decades of national investment. Section 3. What universal design actually looks like in Japan. The real test of any policy is what it looks like on the ground, and the details in Japan are worth going through one by one. Start with train stations. Japan operates roughly 9,500 railway stations, and among the 3,580 that serve 3,000 or more daily riders, 91.8% now have elevators or slopes, 95.1% have tactile paving, and 88.5% have barrier-free toilets. Platform screen doors have gone in at 858 stations. What makes those numbers even more striking is how recently this changed. As late as 1998, Tokyo Station, the terminal for the famous bullet train, didn't have a single elevator. Railway officials at the time dismissed barrier-free access as a welfare project, not the railway's responsibility. 80 to 90% of Tokyo's trains and subways are now wheelchair accessible. And those textured tiles you see on sidewalks and station platforms, the ones with raised dots and long strips, those are actually a Japanese invention. A man named Seiichi Miyake created tactile paving in 1965, paying for it out of his own pocket to help a friend named Hideyuki Iwahashi who was losing his vision. Braille inspired the design. Raised dots signal caution, while long parallel strips mean safe to proceed. Workers installed the first tiles at the Okayama School for the Blind on March 18, 1967, and by 1975, every Japan railway platform carried tactile surfaces. Miyake never witnessed his invention go global. He died on July 10, 1982, at just 56. Tactile paving now appears in approximately 150 countries, and Google honored Miyake with a doodle on March 18, 2019. Now, Japan's single most famous universal design product may well be the TOTO Washlet toilet. TOTO holds the title of the world's largest bathroom fixture manufacturer, pulling in $5.47 billion in annual sales across operations in 19 countries. The washlet launched in June of 1980 with 3 core functions: rear cleansing with warm water, warm air drying, and a heated seat. The way TOTO broke through to the public deserves its own story. A 1982 television commercial featured an actress saying, "Hey everyone, if our hands are dirty, we wash them, right? And the same goes for our sensitive areas." Nobody had ever advertised a toilet on Japanese TV before that moment, and it triggered both outrage and enormous buzz. 18 years passed before TOTO sold its first 10 million washlets. By April 2019, that number reached 50 million, and by August 2022, 60 million, which means the last 10 million sold in just 3 years. 80.3% of Japanese households now own one. For seniors, the design genuinely supports independence, with universal height seats, warm water cleansing that eliminates reaching and wiping, auto flush, and remote controls that help anyone with limited mobility. A brand new $224 million TOTO manufacturing facility in Georgia has boosted U.S. production capacity by 150%. Panasonic took a different path by establishing its age-free subsidiary in 1998, which now operates 66 senior housing facilities and 184 care centers across Japan. Their standout product, the Redesign Plus, became the world's first bed that transforms into a wheelchair at the push of a button. And studies found that 60% of patient transfers that previously needed 2 caregivers dropped to 0% after 11 months of using it. Fujitsu approached the problem through telecommunications with the Raku Raku phone, where Raku Raku translates to easy to use. Launched in September 2001, it features large raised keys, automatic volume adjustment, and a function that actually slows down the speech speed of callers. Over 20 million units have sold. At the city planning level, Toyama City, population about 420,000, adopted a compact city strategy in 2005 and built Japan's first light rail transit system with fully barrier-free stations and low-floor vehicles. Ridership doubled from about 10,000 daily riders in 2005 to 20,000 per day by 2019, earning recognition from the OECD, the United Nations, and the World Bank. Even Japan's shopping streets got the treatment. Over 15,000 covered pedestrian streets called shotengai stretch across the country, featuring pedestrian-only zones, human-scale layouts, resting chairs, and barrier-free paths. One famous example in Tokyo, Sugamo Jizodori, carries the nickname Harajuku for Grannies and runs 780 meters with over 180 shops, all built with older visitors at the center of the design. Section 4. The numbers that changed everything. Whenever someone proposes redesigning the built environment, the first response is always about cost. And that's where the data tells a story that surprises almost everyone. Adding universal design features during new construction costs less than 1% more than standard building, according to the ADA National Network. Retrofitting those same features later runs 2 to 20% more expensive. The Rick Hansen Foundation in Canada framed it this way. Even modest retrofits can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, while proactive planning reduces those costs to pennies per square foot. One example from BC Housing in Canada captures this perfectly. Installing 36-inch doors cost just $7 more per door, but the wider opening needed 2 fewer framing studs, which saved about $10. The net result was actually cheaper, not more expensive. LifeStage Home Designs estimated that including 13 common universal design elements during construction runs about $70,000 less than doing the same work as a renovation afterward. And that's where the urgency hits. Falls rank as the leading cause of injury-related death among Americans over 65, with over 14 million older adults falling every year, 1 in 4. 43,020 Americans over 65 died from falls in 2024 alone, and the fall death rate has climbed 51% over the past decade. $80 billion a year. That's what falls cost the U.S. healthcare system, according to research published in the journal Injury Prevention. Medicare shoulders $53.3 billion of that amount, and projections push the total past $101 billion by 2030. But here's the other side of those numbers. A study in JAMA Network Open tracked a community home modification program that reduced falls by roughly 40%. Every dollar spent returned $2 in savings, with the program costing $765 per person while preventing $1,613 per person in healthcare costs. This is why the CDC's STEADY initiative, Stopping Elderly Accidents, Deaths, and Injuries, now recommends home safety assessments as a standard part of fall prevention, often involving occupational therapy specialists who evaluate how people perform their activities of daily living and suggest modifications that can prevent injuries before they happen. Less than 1% added cost to build it right on one side, $80 billion a year in fall injuries on the other. Universal design isn't a luxury, it's one of the most cost-effective public health measures available. Section 5. The world catches on. Japan proved the model works, and the rest of the world has started paying attention. The World Health Organization launched the Global Network for Age-Friendly Cities and Communities in 2010. That network now spans over 1,700 members across more than 60 countries, built around a framework of 8 domains of age friendliness, from outdoor spaces and transportation to housing, social participation, and community health services, totaling 169 checklist items. Singapore stands as the most thorough adopter after Japan. The EASE program, short for Enhancement for Active Seniors, launched in 2012 through Singapore's Public Housing Authority, with the government covering 87.5 to 95% of home modifications like grab bars, slip-resistant flooring, ramps, and foldable shower seats. An expanded EASE 2.0 rolled out in April 2024, and starting April 2026, the program extends to private properties as well. Every new public housing unit in Singapore now comes with universal design features built in from the start. The Berkeley Public Policy Journal described the program as a prototype for how universal design can be scaled up in a cost-effective manner. Norway set an ambitious target called Norway Universally Designed by 2025, with government action plans running from 2009 through 2019. Across the European Union, the European Accessibility Act passed in 2019 and took full effect on June 28, 2025. That law harmonizes accessibility requirements across all 27 EU member states for consumer products and services, covering smartphones, banking, and e-commerce, and it directly affects over 80 million EU citizens with disabilities. The United States has taken a more scattered approach. The Americans with Disabilities Act covers public spaces but allows separate accessible options, which universal design would not permit. The ADA doesn't touch private homes at all, and universal design remains largely voluntary. What has gained real traction is the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities, established in April 2012 as part of the WHO's global network. That network enrolled its 1,000th community on September 3, 2025, which means nearly 40% of Americans now live in a participating community. AARP has committed $4.2 million in community challenge grants since 2017. A separate movement called Visitability has roots going back to 1986, when Eleanor Smith founded it in Atlanta. The idea boils down to 3 features in every new home: at least one zero-step entrance, doors wider than 32 inches, and one main floor half-bath. Pima County, Arizona became the first jurisdiction to mandate visitability for all homes, public and private, in 2002, and 8 states now carry visitability laws for publicly funded housing. South Korea faces its own demographic cliff and is projected to become a super-aged society by 2025, with its elderly population exceeding 20%. The country's Hyadol robot, a small friendly companion doll that talks to seniors, reminds them about medication, and calls for help if the user stops responding, has been placed in over 12,000 elderly homes by late 2025. China carries the world's largest elderly population at 267 million people aged 60 and over as of 2021. But research still describes a large gap between China and developed countries in barrier-free construction. The pattern runs predictably. Countries that started aging earliest sit farthest along the curve, with Japan in the lead, Singapore and the Nordic countries close behind, and the United States catching up from a fragmented starting point. Section 6. The challenges nobody talks about. I want to be straight with you about the challenges because the story of universal design is not all forward motion. The biggest misconception floating around is that universal design means one size fits all, and that's flat wrong. The UD project itself states, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Universal design is about creating as much usability as possible for as many people as possible, with options for easy adaptation. Real-world conflicts prove the point. Tactile paving helps people who are visually impaired but can impede wheelchair users, and trade-offs like that are built into the process. Then there's the gap between what the technology promises and what actually gets used. Japan manufactures more care robots than the next 4 countries combined and has spent nearly $100 million developing them. But a 2019 national survey of over 9,000 elder care institutions found that only about 10% had brought in any care robot at all. The widely publicized RoBear, a bare-faced robot designed to lift patients from bed to wheelchair, turned out to be an experimental prototype that never operated in a real care home. The project has been retired, and its own creator called it not a solution. Enforcement tells its own complicated story. Parts of Japan's barrier-free law still function as what's called an effort obligation for existing buildings, which means compliance is encouraged but not strictly enforced. A revised disability discrimination law made reasonable accommodation mandatory for private businesses starting April 2024. But people with disabilities report that their daily lives have barely changed since the revision took effect. Japan's care worker shortage adds another layer of pressure. Every baby boomer in the country turned 75 by the end of 2024, triggering what's been called the 2025 problem, and the estimated shortfall sits at 380,000 care workers. Only one applicant shows up for every 4.25 open nursing care positions. Developing countries face an even steeper climb. A Kenyan analysis put the contradiction plainly. One of the arguments against universal design for developing countries is that it is too expensive to practice. The irony is that developing countries have the majority of the world's neglected disabled persons. When the WHO assessed progress in 2023, less than a third of countries reported having adequate resources to deliver on the UN Decade of Healthy Aging goals. A study of 135 architects in Flanders found that budget constraints and skepticism from other stakeholders ranked as the main barriers to universal design adoption. An AARP official captured the American version of that problem. The builders aren't hearing demand from their customers for these accommodations, so they haven't been willing to add them. Even older home buyers don't think about accessibility until they need it. That last line might be the single most important sentence in this entire video. Most people don't think about universal design until they've already fallen, already lost mobility, or already been forced out of a home they loved because it wasn't built for the way their body changed. Section 7. What's coming next? Every demographic trend line points the same direction from here. Globally, the number of people aged 65 and over stands at roughly 830 million today and is expected to nearly double to 1.6 billion by 2050. People over 80 will triple to 426 million. A milestone that can never be undone arrived in 2018, when people 65 and older outnumbered children under 5 worldwide for the first time in human history. Nearly 80% of American adults 65 and older currently live in their own home, and 75% of seniors now express a strong desire to age in place. The infrastructure they'd need keeps shrinking in the other direction, though. 20% of U.S. nursing homes have downsized since 2020, with 63,000 fewer beds available, and nursing homes are closing faster than new ones open. Senior living occupancy recovered to only 87% of pre-pandemic levels by the end of 2024. Home-based universal design is no longer a preference, it's becoming the only option. Technology keeps closing gaps. AI-powered fall prediction platforms can now detect changes in gate speed and bathroom frequency to flag a fall risk up to a week before it happens. Smart home ecosystems, including motion detectors, ambient sensors, and stove monitors, assemble real-time data on how a senior moves through their day, and by 2027, over 60% of senior living communities are expected to run on AI or Internet of Things-based care systems. $4.2 trillion. That's the current global value of the silver economy, meaning products and services built for people over 60, and it's growing at 7.6% per year. The aging-in-place technology market alone should reach $120 billion by 2030. Japan keeps pushing the boundary. Expo 2025 in Osaka, themed Designing Future Society for Our Lives, showcased advanced nursing care equipment as technology, which will serve as a reference for other countries facing the problem of aging populations. DPI Japan has published a 2030 vision calling for mandatory barrier-free access in every building and every form of public transportation. International frameworks keep growing alongside the need. The OECD released a Cities for All Ages report in 2025. The WHO's global network has passed 1,700 members, and the Third World Congress on Age-Friendly Cities is scheduled for June 2026 in Spain. Conclusion. Every statistic leads back to the human story. 2 stories capture everything we've covered today better than any statistic can. Seiichi Miyake spent his own money in 1965 to invent textured tiles so a friend going blind wouldn't get hurt crossing the street. Those tiles now appear in roughly 150 countries. Miyake died before he could see any of it. Sam Farber couldn't sleep one night in 1990 while visiting France, kept awake by watching his wife Betsy struggle with a vegetable peeler because of her arthritis. He called a designer at 1:30 in the morning. Betsy wasn't just the inspiration for what came next, she served as co-designer, and together they created OXO Good Grips. That first vegetable peeler now sits in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art and the Smithsonian. Its blade forged by a Japanese company that once made samurai swords, and OXO now produces over 1,000 products, every one of them rooted in the philosophy of universal design. Universal design has never been about disability, and it has never been about old age. It's about building a world where nobody struggles with something that could have been made easier from the start. Japan grasped this before anyone else because Japan had no choice. But the demographic shift that forced Japan's hand is now unfolding everywhere, and by 2050, 1 in every 6 people on Earth will be over 65. The only real question left is whether your home, your community, and your country will adopt universal design before you need it or after. Ron Mace left us with the answer. We can make anything more universally usable, but to do that, we must pay attention to details. If this video helped you, please subscribe and share it with someone you care about. The more people who understand universal design, the faster it reaches the communities that need it most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.